So there's this word that we're going to use a lot throughout this entire course. That word is scope. And I'd like to introduce to you now the idea of application scope, or what we might call more properly the scope application model. See, when we create an application in ServiceNow, we have some minimum expectations about how it's going to behave. And if you take a look at the different tenets of this so-called philosophy, I think that the expectations make a lot of sense. I mean, if we're going to install an app, we better be able to uninstall it. Our app should not break the system or break other apps or easily fall victim to unwanted interaction from other applications. And all the things that an app needs to do what it do should be clearly defined, and essentially it should be nice and neat and tidy in its own little package. So maybe where you live, you celebrate a feast holiday. For example, something like Thanksgiving in the United States of America. Or maybe you just have been to a buffet before, where you just get to pile on as much food as you want onto your poor, undersized little dinner plate. It might seem like a weird image, but I always think of this concept as like a dinner plate, where if our ServiceNow instance is kind of the whole plate, and you're going to the buffet and you're putting all these different food dishes onto your plate, right? You've got some mashed potatoes here and some creamed corn there and maybe some casserole here and so on. Let's face it, after a while, all that food starts to kind of just ooze together, right? It all starts to overlap and interact, and I fully admit that I don't care. I just shovel it down my face as quickly as I can, but maybe you are, or you know someone who hates it when their food touches on their plate. You know what I mean? Well, see, in the early days, applications that were created were kind of like these different dishes piled onto our buffet plate. It was a little bit tricky to define how they interacted. There wasn't a very elegant way to do it. And so you might have a script written for one application, somehow messing with the records in another application's table, or maybe another application still might be calling some JavaScript that you had written especially for your application. You didn't really intend for it to be available outside of your application. Setting up this kind of segmentation and delineation wasn't so easy back then. But back in the Fuji release of ServiceNow, the idea of application scope was introduced, essentially providing us a way to compartmentalize application components. Or if we go back to our food image, think of all that tasty food, but being placed neatly into little compartments of a bento box. You know what a bento box is, right? The Japanese segmented lunch boxes. Although they're not just for lunch, I mean just a segmented food presentation, but you get my idea, I hope. So now, this lovely idea of application scope is that we can keep them separated, and that separation is sacrosanct. Once it's set, you are not to change it. And we can identify each customization or configuration record of each application as belonging to the application that it does. And just like eating bits of food out of a bento box, you get the choice of when and how certain bits of food will interact, if at all. That's kind of what we get from this whole scoped model. We get to pick how things interact, and we can add and remove them completely in such a way that knock-on effects are minimized. So you might be thinking, well, what about the stuff that is common all throughout ServiceNow? I don't remember creating a stinking application when, I don't know, I go create a user or add a new column on the user table, or when I go write a script against the incident table. These are all things that I've never had to think about this idea of scope before. Are you telling me that incident management is not an application and user administration is not an application? Well, no, but all this legacy stuff that has been baseline to the platform since prior to the Fuji release, that all belongs to the giant primordial scope that we call global. So global is not the absence of scope. It is a scope. It's just a very special scope. And so all those tables that you find synonymous with ServiceNow itself that are part and parcel to the platform, those are all in global scope. And if you don't stay in your lane, if you step out of line, ServiceNow will, if you take a look at the screenshot at the bottom of the slide, let you know. It'll give you a little heads up. Hey, this table that you're trying to customize, it belongs to one scope, except right now you've indicated that you're working under the auspices of another. See, when you edit something in ServiceNow, that's not just a plain old transient data record, but when you edit something like a table or a script, right, something that actually defines the behavior of ServiceNow, you're always doing it in the name of a particular scope, whether you realize it or not. It's almost like having an update set running at all times. And so if you're telling ServiceNow that right now you're working on application A, but then you just jump over to a table that is, for example, earmarked as application B, and you try to modify that table, ServiceNow will let you know that if you were to do such a thing, you'd be, well, to make an 80s movie reference, kind of crossing the streams. And so in the screenshot below, you see the orange circle with the exclamation point, and it tells you, hey, this record is in the global application, but currently you're working in loaner request scope. You have to switch to mess with this. Now, I know that this can be a bit abstract and a little bit difficult to visualize. I promise you will encounter this message, and I will too. As you might imagine, when the idea of application scope first dropped, there was a lot of discussion around like, hey, why would I want to do this scope thing? I'm worried about losing out on some functionality if I develop it in a private scope. Well, the recommendation for the best practice is, and has been ever since, that in all but the most edgy of edge cases, you're going to be developing your brand new custom applications in their own scope. This is true, too, when ServiceNow introduces new features into the platform. They are very often contained in their own scope. This is definitely the way to go. And I don't think this slide emphasizes the point enough. If you just look at the slide, you think, oh, okay, well, if I build something in global scope, I miss out on this thing called delegated development, whatever it is. Maybe I can live without that. It's not quite that simple, because you miss out on the tidy benefits of having everything tagged and segmented in its own little force field, its own little container, if you just add to the giant vat of existing things that we call global scope. And I hope that by the end of this class, I can convince you that working on a scoped application, using the scoped application model, is really beneficial to you in many ways, even if it's hard to see that now, just from a handful of slides. And if it means anything to you, that buzz and that back and forth and the tete-a-tete between solution consultants about, well, should I build in global scope or private scope? That noise is essentially quieted down. It's far and away accepted that building in a custom scope is the way to go. So how do we know what's in what scope anyway? Well, see, when you build an application, that application is, like everything in ServiceNow, going to have two names. A human-friendly label of sorts, and a computer-friendly system name. I'm glad that this slide is here for you to come back and refer to, but I will not be reading this slide at you. Instead, let me just tell you that all scoped applications, their system name starts with the letter X and an underscore. And after that comes something called the app creator company code. That's a system property that's set in your system properties table. Every customer's got a unique one. I'm going to prove this to you during demo. And then after that, we get an underscore and the name of your application, provided it follows certain rules. And again, I think this is easier to just see, but you're going to have to wait. I'm sorry, you're just going to have to wait until I do my demo for section 3.2 of the course. Then you'll see me create an application, and then you'll be able to see me wrangle with ServiceNow's expectations for my so-called scope namespace. But once I get that application created and I choose my scope namespace, then it gets applied to every component of my application. Technically, every table in my application will start with that scope namespace, and every script in my application will start with that scope namespace, and every event that I register in the event registry in the name of my application will start with that scope namespace, etc. So I promise you'll see what I mean. So you remember a couple slides ago, there was this thing in the global scope column crossed out called delegated development. Well, let me tell you what that is, and I might do a quick demo of it. We'll see. But the idea is this. Essentially, you don't want to go around handing out that system administrator role like candy to people just so it's easy for them to do whatever they want while working on whatever application. Yeah, from a sysadmin convenience perspective, that sounds awfully nice. Until you realize the headaches that will come back to you for having had such flagrant disregard for the principle of least privilege. So look, when you're working on your application, you get to assemble your little dream team, and you get to add people to your application, basically add them to your project, without even entering any project management type applications. You select the people you want. For each of those people, you hit little toggle switches of what they can and cannot do. ServiceNow blesses them with yet another role called delegated underscore developer, and then behind the scenes, ServiceNow knows how to work out which applications these people can and cannot access from a developer standpoint, and within each application, what they can and cannot do on an app by app or scope by scope basis. That's what delegated development is. You don't have to use it, but it sure makes your life easier in granting just the right amount of privilege as you assemble your teams. And this way you're not scrambling around, fussing too much about roles and groups and other things you might ordinarily think about when you're dealing with granting access. So I've said before that the general rule is, hey, develop in custom scope. Don't develop new applications in global scope. If you find yourself particularly bored someday, round up a couple folks from your local ServiceNow users group, or SNUG, and take them out to the local corporate Americana restaurant that puts pounds of butter in everything, and whatever they've got on special, like dollar margaritas or whatever it is, order a round of those, maybe a couple, and then say something provocative, like, yeah, I'm just going to develop all my stuff in global scope. I assure you, the vitriol that follows will also come with a variety of pretty good arguments as to why you should not do that, and you can hear it straight from the mouths of everyday folks like you and me. For now, I'm asking you to trust me that that is the better practice, to develop in custom scope. So the last thing I want to cover in this module is to make a distinction between application development and application deployment. More on that in a minute.